Alright, so what we're going to do today is talk about the Gilded Age. And by the way, I'm sorry if you noticed my eye. Don't know if it's allergies or what, so we'll just have to deal with it. So what we're going to do today is talk about the Gilded Age, which is this period roughly from 1877 to, there's no real defined end for our class purposes. Let's go ahead and say 1896. But with the Gilded Age, the idea is everyone thought this was something of a golden age. Things were better, things were bigger. We see the Second Industrial Revolution really characterizing the age. The rise of the robber barons, the rise of commercialism, all of this stuff, and all of it pretty much made possible by the advent of the railroads, and specifically, hang on, I'm just going to adjust my camera a little bit. Specifically, with railroads, the idea that, now that you can connect the entire nation, now, there's ways to get goods to and fro. To and fro. What is this, the 1950s? Jeez. If people thought it was a Gilded Age, then it's this man, Samuel Clemens. We probably know him better as Mark Twain. He's the guy that's realistically, he's the one that coins the term Gilded Age, because he says, look, it's not golden. It looks gold. It looks like this rise of prosperity. It looks like we're going to have a departure from the past, that we're going to be able to do all of this sort of new stuff. But realistically, if you were to dig just below the surface, gilded, the term gilded means something that you think is golden. But when you look, it's actually just covered in gold. It's a baser material underneath, What's the old phrase I once heard a prof say? Shit on a silver platter, it's still crap. He told me that, and of course, the way I think, I'm like, why would you, use a toilet, man? For God's sakes, use a toilet. But it's this idea that, if it's golden, it's truly prosperous for everybody. But he's going to say it's the Gilded Age because there's just so much other stuff going on that, if we look at it's very much like, if you will, the top-down history. People think a lot about the robber barons. People think a lot about the guys at the top, the rise of industry, the rise of all this stuff going on. But nobody really really cares about the common person. Nobody cares about the fact that people are losing their jobs, that it's changing the fabric of the United States, that things are changing in such a way as to be irrevocable. We're going to have the rise of labor unions, and along with that, the rise of labor strikes, violence, bloodshed. Not to mention, this same era encompasses that westward expansion. So things like the Indian Wars, stuff like that. So guys like Mark Twain are very, very, very critical of the era. And part of the reason why he's critical is we're going to see, a lot of the Gilded Age being dominated and influenced by this guy, Herbert Spencer. Now, Spencer is an English sociologist, and he's most famous for the idea of social Darwinism. The idea was to take from a business sense Darwin's theory of evolution as espoused in his 1859 work, Origin of Species, and try to apply that to the business world. So the idea is, the idea of survival of the fittest. If, how Darwin said evolution worked was, quick and dirty, which, by the way, we'll actually talk about evolution with the Scopes trial in the 1920s. Evolution, by the way, I'm not pro or against. Well, actually, I am pro evolution, but I'm not here to, tell you that evolution is true or right. And I say that because, believe it or not, when I first took this job a few years back, we actually had to be told, if you're going to teach evolution, offer a, religious-inspired creationism thing as well. Understand, this comes out in 1859. It's 2015. We're still debating this to this day. Believe it or not, though, people did not have a problem with it in the 19th century. In fact, it takes until the rise of fundamentalism, post-World War I in the 1920s. That's when people started to actually care. In the 1800s, the 19th century, we're going to see guys like Spencer try to apply that to business. And so, Darwin had said that, look, if you develop a trait that makes you resistant to cold, okay, then there's a severe cold, all right? Temperatures plummet, ice age, global warming, whatever. If you have a resistance to cold, you live, but those the members of your species around you who are not, resistant to cold, they die off. Then you pass on your cold-resistant genes. So, theoretically similar, if in a species, half of the people die off because they're not resistant to cold. And then, the half that survive pass on those genes, then you have evolved because now your species is resistant to cold. And it's not that they've really changed, it's those who weren't just died off. Those traits did not continue. With Herbert Spencer's idea, he said that, look, if you're on top, if you're really stupid rich, if you're a robber baron, it's because you are the most fit. It's because you are smart, intelligent, you know how to find a product, you know how to make stuff work, you're shrewd, and so in that sense, you deserve to be at the top. But if you're on bottom, then you're just stupid. Then you have no idea what you're doing. You are the bottom rung of the social ladder because you deserve to be there. You are not fit. The problem with this, it's junk science in the sense that they never take into account, well, what if you lost your job? Well, you can't afford that. Well, why don't you own the company? If you were smart, you'd own your own company. It doesn't take into the fact that many people are not born into wealth, into chances, into the ability to actually do that thing. Realistically, the robber barons, sure, John D. Rockefeller is, he's a really smart guy. He has a shrewd business sense, but that is not the only thing that let him, become one of the richest men in America. There's so many other factors. Social Darwinism does not take that into account. Social Darwinism simply says that if you're brilliant, you make it to the top. If you're stupid, you stay on bottom. It's stupid. It's long since discredited. But understand, this is the lens through which things are seen in the Gilded Age. And the Gilded Age, it's really, again, enabled by the railroads. If you remember, for the 5 of you that actually watched the video, that, okay, in 1860, the railroads are concentrated here. Now they're all over the United States. We've gone from 35,000 miles of track to 163,000 miles, of which 70,000 were laid in the period from 1880 to 1890. It's an astronomical increase. And it's because of this that if you just look at these railroad lines, okay, if you develop a product in Pennsylvania, okay, now you can actually ship it to California. You've only got a handful of lines to do so, but it's possible. Or you can definitely regularly ship stuff out to Colorado. The entire United States is now interconnected, and railroads mean that you can move heavy goods, lots of traffic, lots of people. It enables everything that comes after. And we've talked about a lot of this, but I just want to, just touch on it for you so they're in your notes. The railroads are the first big business. We see a huge amount of money poured into them. We see the fact that they are overbuilt, and when they fail, they trigger panics and depressions, like the Panic of 1873, which that depression is going to be nationwide. Why? Because it shows that big businesses control the economy now. Big businesses are, not only do they enable, railroads don't just enable businesses, but as a big business, it controls the entire economy. And so when it fails, because railroads now connect communities, take Oklahoma. Okay, Stillwater's connected to Oklahoma City, connected to Tulsa, but then at large, they're now connected to the East Coast. If there's a ripple in the East, it moves out to the West. Sorry, I'm still halfway through this semester, and I still haven't, put like a thing flipping the directions here on the camera. But it still affects everything in the West. So depressions are now far more dangerous. Not to mention because railroads enable other businesses. If the railroads fail, the businesses dependent on those railroads to ship their commodities also fail. One thing that characterized the Gilded Age is that shift to big business. And so what that means is, if this were the 1860s, okay, consider this. Today, when you buy a shirt, you go to Walmart. Well, if you're like me, you go to Walmart. If you're cheap, you go to Walmart. And they have the custom sizes, small, medium, large, blah, 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 blanket. Okay, they have all of those sizes. And so you can buy whatever you want. Now, where are those goods made? Well, they're made in China. So in the case of our, globalized economy, okay, the shirts are made in China. I'm tapping over here on the thing, but you can't see it. The shirts are made in, go up to the west, China. They're then trucked to Arkansas to the Walmart distribution, and then they're sent all over the United States. Now today, we use the interstate system. Railroads are still there, but they're in decline. Now, in the 1890s, what would happen if you wanted a shirt? Well, the 1860s, you wanted a shirt, you'd go to your local tailor, you'd be custom fitted. 2 weeks, he would make you 3 shirts, and you'd literally wear those till they fell apart. But now, with the rise of railroads, okay, you can have a guy making, mass producing shirts at a textile mill in Massachusetts, and you can ship them all over the United States. If you look, railroads connect. There might only be one or little slivers. Railroads connect every state and territory in the continental United States by 1890. It means that now if the railroad fails, that business in Massachusetts also fails. It's all interconnected. If one part hiccups, the rest tumbles down. Now, what makes the railroad so viable? Where you can lay 70,000 miles of track in 10 years compared to 35,000 in 30 is new technology. Technology is really the driving force. The Industrial Revolution has finally hit the United States. And with that, we get the rise of industrial capitalism. And what industrial capitalism is that shift away from, the putting out system, if you will. The idea that, okay, say, 3 people owning a shop, they're turning out chairs. Industrial capitalism says, let's build a factory, let's hire 100 workers, and let's mass produce chairs. Let's make nothing but chairs. And by making them in bulk and by employing unskilled labor, we can drive the individual cost per chair down, but we can sell them at a similar cost so that our profits remain high. So the Industrial Revolution, now couple that with the Bessemer process, where steel had been made for hundreds of years, possibly thousands. But with the Bessemer process, you could mass produce steel quickly and cheaply. I forget the exact specs, but it's something like it took once a couple of weeks to make, an iron rail, like for a railroad. But now you can make that same iron rail in, just a few hours. You can mass produce this stuff. It's better quality. More and more impurities are driven out of the system. And understand, steel and even iron, that enables railroads. Railroads enable everything else. As well as, the History Channel, other than, aliens, once had a show, Man Moment Machine. It's very misogynistic, but Man Moment Machine. I've tried to, PCify it a little bit to person time technology. But the idea that you need a person who is, has the wherewithal to understand what technology can do and understand what, in the case of the Gilded Age, what business can do, what can be done. You need the time, the correct moment. And then you need that actual piece of technology that enables whatever that visionary sees. In this case, railroads create this new industry. Railroads create the idea of the big business, create the idea of the millionaire, of the billionaire. They enable things like oil, steel, gas, electricity, stuff like that. So in this case, you're going to see person-time technology with these guys, the robber barons. From left to right, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan. And these guys, what they're going to do is like in the case of Carnegie, all right? You have your time, Industrial Revolution. You have the person, Carnegie, who is, a smart, self-made man. And then you have technology and the fact that now you have high-quality steel at a time when everybody wants steel. There is a market for it, and he knows how to make it cheaply, and get it out to everybody. This revolutionizes the United States. If the 1920s is the creation of our modern world, in this how we want to live our lives, it's a sense of appliances, free time, 40-hour workday, stuff like that. The Gilded Age is the creation of the modern United States. This is where we industrialize. This is where we become the preeminent industrial power in the world, the largest market economy, where we start getting all sorts of new technological inventions. Invention becomes a business, all thanks to these people, to the Industrial Revolution, and the fact it's just the appropriate time. It's not inevitable, but everything just comes together and locks together in the Gilded Age. Now, the robber barons, okay? By robber baron, these people are the celebrities of their day. They're like the Kim Kardashians without the crazy photo ops. However, Okay, they contribute to society, unlike the Kardashians. In the sense that, and what I mean is, they're the celebrities of their day, but they come with a downside. The robber barons are going to make stupid amounts of money. They're going to bring order to industry. They're going to make everything efficient. They're like the freaking Borg from Star Trek, if you will. But, just like the Borg, nobody cares about the individual drone. Sorry, I've been watching Star Trek Voyager nonstop for 3 months. I'm about to finish season 7. And so there's going to be more than a few Star Trek references creeping in. Just for the record, there you go. Now, what we're going to see is railroads, remember, they lead to massive profits. Remember, the government loans millions of dollars. As the railroads enable large industries, these industries become dependent. They make a stupid amount of money. Things like the Bessemer process in steel. So what this means is new people, that new generation of businessmen coming up, look to the railroads. How do we run a company? How do we, make a lot of money? Also, how can we use the railroad to create markets? In addition, remember all that mining from westward expansion. All of that ore is flooding into the United States. The flooding in of iron enables steel. The flooding of oil leads to some sort of desire to how do we use this stuff. And so pretty much westward expansion, railroads, Gilded Age, all of it feeds in on each other and creates a new economy. And this economy is going to boom. But again, with robber barons, they don't really care about the individual people. And we're going to see that here when we talk about how the robber barons made stuff work. I want to focus on two, Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. I mean, these were the two preeminent up until the 1890s. J.P. Morgan, he's there. He's responsible for Westinghouse and electricity. He works with Thomas Edison. But his big stuff is going to be post-1890s. In the case of Carnegie, he is the original American dream. I mean, when you hear the idea of the American dream, to make something of yourself, this guy is the one who starts that. He emigrates from Scotland. He's illiterate. He takes a job working for the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he's going to work his way up to where he becomes vice president of the company, working under Tom Scott, who is, the president of the company. And for him, his big thing is he gets into the steel manufacturing business. He builds steel mills. I cannot say those two words together fast. Sorry. Steel plants. There we go. Well, short circuit. He builds steel plants. He controls the mines, all that stuff. And he builds a huge steel empire. And he's there at the exact time that the United States wants steel. We need more railroads. We want skyscrapers. We need steel for the new Steel Navy. We'll talk about that in the next lecture. We need this stuff, and Carnegie knows how to make it quick, effective, and cheap. Now, to do that, again, robber barons, in the sense, these are the captains of industry. That's one of the things they would be called. And by the way, I hope you read in the Norton Mix and, get an idea, get a sense of what, I specifically ask you to read Carnegie's Wealth, how, they want to actually acquire this stuff. He believes in the concept of vertical integration. The idea is to own all aspects of production. Now, what I mean by that is to keep costs down. If you just simply run the steel plant, okay, well, your cost is affected by I'm trying to find where the camera is. Hang on. It's affected by the refinery. It's affected by the shipping industry, by the guy who's actually selling it, by the processing. All of this stuff affects your cost. And if it affects cost, it also contributes to the price. Carnegie said, no, I want to own the mine. I want to own the steel plant. I want to own the railroad. I want to own the place where the steel is sold. By doing that, he can control cost. It's a very diversified portfolio, but it's also risky. If there's a failure in one aspect, the whole system crumbles. Now, John D. Rockefeller, however, his thing is Standard Oil. He makes the business in the oil industry. And his idea is oil at this time was used it would be refined into kerosene, and it would light, kerosene was used to light homes. And it's because of this, because now everybody has a kerosene lamp, that the working day no longer ended at sundown. But kerosene was also dangerous. It's responsible for a lot of house fires. And Rockefeller says, I can bring a standard production to it. I can do this in such a way that you can have a standard quality. That's why it's called Standard Oil. And it would be safer, more efficient. I will make the brand name, Actually, he creates the idea of the brand name, the idea that if you bought Standard Oil, you knew what you were getting. Now, Rockefeller runs the classic monopoly, what we're used to. His idea, buy out all the competitors. He wants to own all the oil refineries in the United States. He gets close. He gets 90%. I mean, this guy will make so much money. He will make Bill Gates look like an amateur. I mean, this guy makes a stupid amount of money. But his nickname would be John D. Rockefeller because this guy was ruthless. What he would do is if he wanted to buy a refinery, he would get in a price war. And he would cut his prices so low, the small independent refinery it couldn't compete, and it would go out of business, and he would buy it for cheap. Or sometimes, pardon me, he would buy a refinery and then close it, lay everybody off for the sole reason he wanted to control oil prices. Remember, the more refineries you have, okay, the more you can do, theoretically, your prices can fall. So to help, drive prices up, supply and demand, he would even close some of his own refineries just to keep the price up. Again, these guys are romanticized, but why it's gilded is nobody at the time really wants to look at what's happening to the individual person. Now, these guys control industry. I mean, these guys are going to be some of the largest, employers of the nation. They're going to drive the economy. They're even going to affect the election of 1896. They're going to attempt to buy their own president. We'll talk about that in a second. But at the same time, on a more personal note, we see the rise of invention as a business. The idea that now people are inventing because money is to be made. We're not quite there to the stupid infomercials, but we're as close as the 19th century can get. If we look in the 1890s, 200,000 patents. Those are more patents than had been issued by the U.S. Patent Office ever. In the sense, like from the very beginning, all the way to 1889, 200,000 patents had not been issued. But we're going to see that number and more in the 1890s, and on and on and on and on. We see that this creates the new modern America we're used to. Things like the Kodak camera, you can now have home photography in the sense that, you can now take selfies or picture with your food at home. You don't have to wait for them to, set the stuff on fire and get the plume of smoke or whatever. It's not quite how we're used to. You would have like 5 exposures, and after you took them, you had to send in the entire camera, but we're getting there. You have new refrigerated railroad cars, which enables those cattle drives, because now you can ship beef all over the United States. 1876, we get Alexander Graham Bell patenting the telephone. Bell's the guy on the right. I say patent, he wasn't the first to invent it, but he was the first to actually get the patent on it, so he's the one we all remember. My advice to you, if you come up with a stupid invention, patent it, then figure out if it works. If it does, you go into the history books. If not, nobody cares. We're also going to see like Thomas Alva Edison, 1877. We get the phonograph. We can now have music. We can record and listen to our own voices, which causes a societal stir because a lot of people thought it was maybe demonic tools or that somehow, it's placing curse, stuff like that. This is the transition into modernity. And understand that transition is not always easy for people that have lived a certain way for generations and cling to certain religious beliefs and things like that. This is shocking. 1879, we get the light bulb and finally harness electricity and try to, bring light to every home in a safer way than John Rockefeller's Standard Oil. Think about it. Oh, sorry for the yawn. Which would you rather have in your home? The light bulb, which I have up over here, or would you rather a kerosene lamp that, if there's an earthquake, because Oklahoma doesn't have earthquakes, right? If there's an earthquake, tips over, boom, and your house burns down. It's safer. Again, it's transitioning into modernity. Good old Thomas Edison on the left. A lot of people don't like Edison. Okay, and there's a movement, especially if you like the Oatmeal comics, about Nikola Tesla. Understand, Edison is kind of a robber baron in the sense he profits off other people's ideas. He does what makes money. He's there to feed a certain market. Guys like Tesla wanted to benefit mankind. Edison is there to make a buck. And understand, with the Gilded Age, economic opportunity becomes the driving centerpiece of American history. How can we make money? Understand, it's an old adage, and it's unfortunately true. People don't do anything without any sort of economic incentive, and the Gilded Age it's driven by those incentives. And along with that, because of that, if people are going to make stuff, they've got to make you want to buy it. How do you know you need a Snuggie if nobody tells you you need a Snuggie? So to that end, in 1867, we see roughly $50 million nationwide spent on advertising. That increases tenfold to $500 million, $500 million in 1900. To put $500 million in perspective, remember, in 1936, you could get a bacon cheeseburger for a nickel, and they're spending $500 million in advertising. The 1870s, we're going to see the rise of the department store. We're going to see the mail order catalog, the newspaper ad, all geared to getting you to buy stuff. With department stores, it's things like we have like Sears, Macy's, stuff like that sell various different types of goods. No longer Jim's clothing shop. Mail order catalog, you can, obtain a Sears catalog. You can, in Colorado, buy something in Pennsylvania and it'll be shipped by rail to you. Or the newspaper ad, this idea of, hey, if you have stuff you want to sell, actually advertise it so people know about it and will buy it. We start seeing the rise of the chain store, the idea that you can go to a Sears Roebuck in Pennsylvania and then go to a similar Sears Roebuck in Massachusetts and similar in New York and on and on and on and on. And all of this is made possible by technology, by new inventions, and the railroads which enabled the shipping of all of this stuff all over the United States. Without those Without those twin things, technology and railroads, okay, you don't have any of this stuff. Now, this is unfortunately going to mean that change in labor and the decline of small businesses. Do you want to buy a $100 chair made by a craftsman, or the $10 chair at Walmart? I mean, that's basically what's going on here. This is, and I used this quote once, I don't know if it's actual, the Walmartization of America. I've heard a student use that, and it's kind of apt. In a sense, mass-produced, low-quality, cheaper goods that are better for the American consumer, but on the downside are not better for the American employee. It's this double-edged sword. Now, I apologize. I think I might be getting a little cold. I mentioned the last lecture my wife was sick, and I think here it comes. I apologize. It's been a little dry, so I'm going to try to liven this up a little bit with some of my favorite ads from the Gilded Age. Because yes, they're trying to make you buy stuff, such as cocaine toothache drops, instantaneous cure for a price of 15 cents. Give me a cocaine toothache drop. I'm not going to remember I have a face, let alone a toothache. This type of stuff was common. Understand, we don't have a Food and Drug Act until the early 1900s, early 1910s. So you could quite literally, as evidenced by this ad, give little kids cocaine, and it's perfectly fine. For sale by all druggists. This isn't regulated. It's not controlled. Dude, it's fine. Go get stoned. Nobody cares. Or things like the beard generator. Success guaranteed after 4 to 6 weeks. Even by young men not above 17 years of age. Do you have that 13-year-old brother that needs a beard? We've got it for you here. Or if you've got a kid, here you go. I mean, and this is crazy. And we're also going to see things like cologne and perfumery, Cologne on the Rhine, Germany. The city of Köln in Deutschland. This idea, just make it seem foreign, make it seem dignified, and people are going to want it. Little Katie chewing tobacco. Never mind that we live in an age now where we want to keep little kids from doing tobacco. Here, I don't know if we're encouraging it or what, but I'll say this. Look at her face. Not only is she creeptastic, I think she's done some of those cocaine toothache drops. I think that maybe this is a gateway to the cocaine. First you chew, then it gives you a toothache, then you want cocaine toothache drops. That's how they do it. I literally just had that thought after like 3 years of doing this. Or frog cologne. Ladies, do you want your man to smell like a frog? We can do that. Welcome to the Gilded Age. I understand kiss the frog, he turns into a prince. That doesn't mean make your prince smell like a frog. Just saying. Now, I mean, those are just and there's numerous other ads. I mean, this becomes a huge, booming business. Now, the problem is with all this business is what does it mean for labor? Generally, you're working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, probably no breaks, not even a lunch break. You're working 60 hours a week. The only day you get off is Sunday, and it's because you're expected to be in church. If you're a skilled laborer, so that means you're not making this cologne, or you're not making the beer generator, or you're not making Standard Oil, you're earning 20 cents an hour. Okay, so 10 hours a day, that's $2 a day, $400 a year. Those are about average wages. There's no safety standards at all. Workplace accidents are common. To kind of show just a couple of things, one of my favorite jobs of this era would be the brakeman on a railroad. Remember, railroads are enabling things. To couple cars together in the 1880s, you use what was called the link and pin coupler, where what happens is while the train is moving and backing up these two cars together, this guy stands in the middle. If you look, he's not at the side. He's not at the side. He's standing in between the two stuff. What he has to do is grab the chain, slide it into this receptacle, drop the pin, and then jump back before the train cars actually touched each other. Generally, what was said, I mean, this is stupidly dangerous work. What was said is if a guy had all 5 fingers, he didn't know what he was doing. If he had 4, he's got some experience. If he's got 3, he knows what he's doing. 2, this guy is really experienced. 1, and it's time to find him a new job. Quite literally, you got more experience, the more hazardous, the longer you're on this hazardous job. But it's a bell curve. It's great, 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 great. Nope, we're putting you out to pasture. Now, if you look at modern American train cars, we use what's called the knuckle coupler, the Janny coupler. It's, like this where the train comes in and it hooks like this and pulls it. That was designed in the 1880s. It was designed to be safer for these guys. But railroads did not want to install them because, understand, there's no OSHA, there's no Occupational Safety Health Administration, there's no workman's comp, there's no disability, there's no sick leave. It's quite literally cheaper to maim a bunch of people doing this job and then bring in others than it was to actually just install new couplers, which once they finally do in the 1890s makes profits go up because you can haul more stuff. They're stronger than these giant chains. We're going to see the rise of child labor. What's the statistic? By 1900, 5% of married women will have jobs outside of the home. Ladies, you would work from about when you were 14 to 24. You'd save the money, but at 24, you were supposed to get married. Understand, this is the idea of the separate spheres. The idea the woman's place was in the home. Your job, you run the household, you punch out babies, and you make them into good Republicans. Little R Republicans. The idea, people willing to know and help the American Republic. Men, our job, we're supposed to go work, we're supposed to do all this stuff, come home, let the women run the house. We exist in 2 separate spheres. They don't overlap. It's not true, it's incredibly sexist, but that's what they thought. So women aren't really working that much. But men, from the time you were 7, you had roughly a 20% chance of working outside the home. Women, you're going to be working in a textile mill. You're going to be working something like this, making clothes. Something, this girl's young, and then when you're about this age, a little older, then you're trying to find a husband. Men, however, again, 7 on, 20% chance you're working outside the home. And again, there's no sort of safety standards. These are kids working in a coal mine. They're called breaker boys. And what they would do is sit on these things straddling coal chutes, and coal would move underneath them at about 20 miles an hour. And what they're supposed to do is grab the coal, check it for impurities, and pick out stuff like, rock or shale or stuff like that. Now, if you look, because there's no OSHA, they don't have gloves. Why? Well, they're little kid hands. You put gloves on them, they can't grab the rocks. They have no masks. A lot of these kids are going to die of black lung. The coal dust is going to get in their lungs. I mean, you can see the haze of the dust right here. These kids would literally go to work in their childhood and just stay there until they died. I mean, they stay in the coal mines. I mean, other sorts of child labor. You're going to see things like working in giant factories. Okay, well, if a gear system stops, don't stop and repair it. Just have a little kid, reach in behind, fix whatever's there. If he loses his arm, so what? Replace him. That was the theory of the Gilded Age. Children were working that same 60-hour work week, but for about half the pay of an actual adult. It's ridiculous. That's why we're going to see things like in the 1870s, the Knights of Labor, the first real effective labor union. And in 1886, it's going to be superseded by the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. We still have that today in the form of the AFL-CIO. And these unions, they're not really trying to get involved in politics just yet. They're trying to have some sort of better compensation for the American worker. I'm going to pause it just a second, get a refill of water, and I'll be right back, which for you guys is going to be instantaneous. Back in a sec. Alright, and we're back. So, with these labor unions trying to make some sort of an impact, understand, big business did not want to let this go lightly. I mean, understand, for these guys, part of why they made so much money is because you don't have to pay people that much. You don't have to have safety standards. Again, businesses are run for profit. And maybe for the products, maybe to help mankind, but in the Gilded Age, certainly not to help the average American worker. So we're going to see, because of that, employers wanted to, tie wages to supply and demand. What that meant was, okay, some people do take pay cuts, stuff like that today, but generally they wanted where you would not know on week to week or month to month how much of a paycheck you got. And obviously, unions think that's incredibly unfair. So unions want to try to tie it to, the workers, in the sense, okay, if someone's hired on to work however many cents an hour, fine, you're always going to pay them that, no matter how good or bad the company does. We're going to see things that, understand, unions had a long road to go to be accepted. I mean, even today, a lot of people don't like them. We're going to see things like, if you were a union member, you could be fired, and that's perfectly fine. If you tried to strike, the court could order you back to work. It was perfectly, fine. If you struck, that the company could, appeal to the government for assistance. We're going to see things like the July 1892 Homestead strike at one of Carnegie's steel plants, that private security guys with military-grade weapons will come in and break up the strike. We're going to see things that, if you were to strike, you could just be fired and somebody else, strike breakers called scabs, would come in and take your job. I mean, you literally had no rights. You were supposed to work for that company until you were dead, basically. And what's interesting is, if you look, let's go back to the pre-Civil War era. The idea of, the free labor ideology that, okay, well, if you're a worker, you go, you work, you do your time, you save money, and then you can either buy your own stuff or your own plot of land. But now, in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, people are paid so little, there's just no way that could even be done. This is quite literally the wage slavery the South was talking about. Because what we're going to see, if you struck, okay, you're fired, you might be beaten, you might be attacked, and then you would be blacklisted, and nobody in that town would ever hire you again. And so you just have to pack up and move and start again and hope the word had not spread. It's really, really, really bad. We're going to see around, in a 20-year period from 1880 to 1900, 23,000 strikes. So roughly around 1,200 strikes per year. That's astronomical. And many of these, such as the Haymarket Square riot of 1886, turned pretty darn violent. In this case, what happens? In the riot in May of 1886, police fire into a crowd, and they kill a number of striking, people. So a couple of days later, an anarchist throws a bomb and kills police officers. The newspaper spun it, reversed the story, saying, oh, well, this happened, that justifies the cops firing into the crowd. Not to mention, because business is now driving the American economy, unionists are often now going to be treated as something akin to anarchists. The idea, if you're challenging the status quo, that, if you're challenging the status quo, you must want the dissolution of the American government. So if you were arrested as a Union member and you were thrown in jail, if you were really suspected of being an anarchist, odds are you might wind up dead in jail and nobody would say anything about it. I mean, this is all pretty horrible stuff. Or we'll see things like the Homestead Strike, where, again, we mentioned the Homestead Strike, the steel plant, or things like the Great Railway Strike of the 1890s, where what we're going to see is, the federal government will be like, well, hey, look, the railroads deliver the mail, so in that case, they're interfering with the federal government. We will mobilize the army to put these guys back to work. And if you see, from this 1890s thing, what do you notice? They're still using link and pin couplers. Again, people want to do whatever they had to maintain their profit margins. If we imagine the 1% today, okay, what is it? The Occupy Wall Street, the 99%. It might be bad today, but it was much, much, much worse during the Gilded Age. These guys wielded a lot of power and influence. And with this comes urbanization, in part because, like in Chicago, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, when you rebuild to accommodate the fact that now immigrants are flooding into cities, people are for the first time moving to cities en masse, trying to get a job. You're going to get the really first big skyscrapers. And unfortunately, you're going to get things such as tenement housing, such as this in 1889. Imagine, if you will, your dorm room, okay? Imagine how that was barely big enough for you and your roommate. Now in that same space, imagine an entire non-nuclear family with all their stuff. So, you have a mother, a father, probably at least one set of their parents, probably 7 kids, and probably at least 2 of the kids' spouses, all crammed into a dorm room size thing. It's absolutely horrible, but this is the life of the immigrant in the 1880s. Because the United States starts attracting all of these immigrants from Eastern Europe. Historically, it had been from Western Europe. Some had been from South America, but now it's Eastern Europe. And we're going to see of a population in World War I of about 137 million, give or take. Actually, it's more like, let's say 130 million. 8.4 million of those were immigrants that came between 1880 and 1910. That is that's like over 1% of just new immigrants. And these are the people that are going to be taking all those factory jobs. They're going to be working for those really pitiful wages. And these people are going to be victimized and targeted. If we look at Chicago, it's one of the reasons you have to build skyscrapers. But understand right now, let's debunk the idea of the melting pot, in the sense that, and I remember seeing a commercial a few years back of, this guy at a restaurant, the waiter only spoke Spanish, and so the guy more or less accosts him and looked and was like, can you believe these people? Understand, in the case of Chicago, 4/5 of the city will be foreign born. They don't assimilate. They more or less stay in their own societal enclaves, carving out a little Italy, a little Czechoslovakia, a little Poland, a little Germany. And in many cases, the people that move might have broken English, but it would take 2 or 3 generations for them to fully, the second or third generation, they're the ones who are going to be absolutely fluent. They're going to cling to their customs, they're going to cling to their traditions, but they're also going to be really played upon by labor bosses who would more or less be waiting at the docks, saying, do you want a job? All right, come this way, and then start screwing these people over from the very beginning. We're also going to see these people challenge that WASP narrative, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. These people are Catholic, and understand, Catholicism was... People did not like Catholicism in the United States. And how soon, might you ask? 1960. People urged others not to vote for John F. Kennedy because he was Catholic, and they said, look, if you vote for him, he's going to take his orders from Rome, not the American people. If we have that kind of... bigotry in the 1960s, what's it going to be like in the 1890s? It's the way people live was absolutely horrible. They're poor, they're uneducated, they're unskilled, and they're preyed upon by people who wanted quick, cheap workers, and they're going to more or less keep them in, servitude. They would do, again, blacklisting. Well, if you get fired, then you're not going to work for anybody in the city ever again. You're dead, so you can't move. Boom, you have to keep working for me. Or they would do things such as, if one of these guys was ever in trial, much like we see with African Americans, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant would always be believed over the immigrant. Their lives are horrible, and they're going to spawn one of the first muckraking novels, The Jungle, which everyone remembers for the meat scandal, remembers for the fact that, they talk about it in a Chicago meat plant. If somebody got a finger chopped off, just throw it into the vat, it's fine. Or, oh, hey, we just killed a rat on the shop floor, throw it in the sausage machine, it's fine. That's not why Upton Sinclair wrote it. Sinclair wrote it to draw attention to these people, but as he will say, and we'll talk about with the Progressive Era, I missed their heart and hit the American people in the stomach. But understand, it is a very, very, very rough life for these people. We're also going to see that graft and corruption extends, it's from the very top of the United States all the way through the bottom. These labor bosses that are preying on the immigrants, they purposefully keep their wages low. In fact, they all get together with various competitors. And, again, there's no business regulation. They say, well, look, let's all keep our wages low. That way my workers don't quit my job and go work for you. It's blatantly illegal. You can't do that now, but there's no government regulation in the Gilded Age. It's still, and it will be up until the 1920s, the idea of laissez-faire, which is French for hands-off. The idea that it's not the government's place to run business. Because of that, you can have these labor bosses. These labor bosses then turn into political bosses. They create their own political machines. And these guys are going to control police forces, manage building contracts, all this stuff that's blatantly illegal. And the best example of both is going to be boss William Tweed of New York, who takes a lot of kickbacks, a lot of bribes. He's contracted to build the New York City courthouse, now today known as the house that Tweed built. It's supposed to take 3 years and cost $250,000. In fact, it takes 15 years and costs $2.8 million because he keeps taking kickbacks, he keeps going slow, and he's like, well, look, you guys need this built. You have to pay me what I say. And the thing is, if we talk today, I'm just saying I just saw some Bernie Sanders stuff about how, nobody on Wall Street has ever gone to prison for the 2008 collapse. That's tame. People are, in fact, being prosecuted for that. The American people, at least, know what's going on. Something will happen. The 1880s, this was perfectly fine, perfectly legal, and the federal government did nothing to stop it. And the state government, well, that's owned by the guys like William Tweed. Consider this. Harry Truman, then the president, 45 to 53, he starts his political career working for a party boss in Missouri. That's just how things were done, and the government was fine with this. We're also going to see, because of this graft, because of the corruption, because of the poor working conditions, there we go, I'll spit it out eventually, we see the rise of socialism, which has a unique connection to Oklahoma, because up until around 1910, this was a red state for an entirely different reason. We literally have OCD. Today we're ultra-conservatives. Back then we're ultra-socialists. We can't make up our mind. But Eugene Victor Debs is going to be one of the preeminent American socialists. And we get this socialism because if we look at the 1890s, it's really what we could call a crisis of social welfare. You have economic depression in 1893. The Panic of 1893 is the worst depression in American history until the Great Depression of 1929. We see the lack of reform, but yet the desire for reform. The widening economic disparity. If you think the rich are getting richer today is bad, it's even worse in the Gilded Age. I don't exactly make a lot of money. I have 71 grand in student loans. Go to be a historian, kids. Yay! I'm not saying I'm well off. But a recent study found that American poor people actually live better than poor people in the rest of the world. It sucks to be poor, but in a welfare state, you have access to some basic livelihoods. And even our concept of poor, it's different than what we're going to find in, say, Africa or Asia or even some European nations. But you don't have that here. There's no safety net. There's no welfare state. Quite literally, if you're poor, you're likely to die of starvation. Think Tiny Tim, for God's sakes. And so what we're going to see is socialism offered a way to reform the entire system. And we see the real beginnings because Debs is leader of the American Railway Union. And what we see is in 1894, there's a strike at the Pullman plant. They want higher wages. They want better working conditions. Debs and the ARU decide, well, okay, what we're going to do is we're not going to work any trains that, have Pullman cars. Pullman, by the way, they're the guys that made sleeper coaches, dining cars, stuff like that. Now, the thing is, the government is not yet concerned about the welfare of its people. The government right now does not see itself as having a direct obligation to helping you. So the government's response, again, was, well, trains deliver the mail, so if the trains don't run, it's interfering with federal government business. So they mobilize the army which then will fire on protesters. And so what we're going to see, even just striking, just saying, I'm not going to do my job because I want better wages. These people are literally putting their lives on the line for things you and I take for granted. Minimum wage, an 8-hour workday, things like that. That came both from the ballot box, but also through bloodshed. And I don't mean that they're revolting, they're starting a revolution, but it's, the government, the big business, they did not want change. And so as we're going to see, because of that railway strike, Debs will then launch the American Socialist Party, and after 1900 enjoys a fair amount of success, even here in Oklahoma. I mean, this guy will run for president 2 or 3 times, and I mean, he's never going to come close, but he gets, a fair amount of the vote. And how much have things changed? Bernie Sanders is an avowed Democratic Socialist, and, he stands a pretty decent shot of getting the Democratic nomination. So, I mean, understand, a lot of stuff we deal with today, the origins on both sides are here in the Gilded Age. I know we're running a little bit long. We only have a few more slides to get through. The video is going to run long, but I want to go ahead and just push through. We're going to see that political reform, it's going to be slow in the Gilded Age, and reform takes until what we call the Progressive Era, which we'll get to in a few lecture slides. In the 1800s, okay, if you remember Jackson, the spoil system, to the victor go the spoils. Well, that had never been changed. So what would happen is if you became president, you would just stock government offices with your cronies, the people who got you elected. It's political patronage. Hey, thanks for voting for me. Here's a job. And generally, the first year or so of a president's term was nothing but filling out these requests of people that came and saw him for jobs. And in 1881, it takes July the 2nd, 1881, it takes a disastrous turn. Because we're going to see this man, Charles Guiteau, the famed disappointed office seeker. He goes to talk to James Garfield. And he says, okay, well, I helped get you elected. I want a job. And Garfield said, no, I want to reform civil service. I want you to have to take a test and prove that you're smart enough to work at this facility. Guiteau's response was to shoot him. Now, Garfield might have survived, except his doctors decided to poke and prod in the bullet wound without something like gloves. They don't understand the germ theory. So Garfield lingers and then dies. He becomes the second American president to be assassinated. And also, yet again, the next victim of the 0-year curse. Elected in 1880, died 1881. His vice president, Chester Arthur, pushes through the Pendleton Civil Service Act of 1883. And this is the first time in American history where you have to prove that you are competent to actually take a job with the American government. I know it's shocking, but believe it or not, before people are like, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Now we're going to see, and this is kind of foreshadowing, the rise of big business, okay, means that we're producing a lot of stuff. We need markets for that stuff. So what we're going to see if we look through the 1880s, and this is just kind of, again, foreshadowing, don't worry too much about this in the context of this lecture, wait till the next one, is we start to look overseas. The Gilded Age enables the fact that now we need to look overseas because we're starting to produce more stuff than we can consume at home. Assassination of Garfield. Now, what's interesting is if we talk about that panic, the Panic of 1893, we're going to see the United States, it's in something of a flux in the 1890s. But many Americans are starting to want that concept of bimetallism. Remember, we talked about that with westward expansion, gold and silver. In 1890, we start purchasing silver under the Sherman Silver Purchasing Act. This idea, we're not going to fully be bimetal, but we'll have some silver coins. The problem is, that changed our economy relative to European economies, which based, their stuff solely on gold. What that means is railroads once again overbuilding. Remember, 70,000 miles of track in a single decade. We've got this gold standard. You've got the fact that any rapid industrial expansion, once it stops, and generally triggers some sort of contraction, it leads to the Panic of 1893. And this encourages some economic reform. It encourages some stuff, but a lot of it's going to have to wait to the Progressive Era. What's really important about this, it helps encourage economic and political reform. We're going to see a play, the 1896 War of Wealth, which is basically, about the run on the banks, which, by the way, banks at this time still, if they closed, you lost all your money. And what we're seeing is people are becoming more acute to the problems of the Gilded Age, more acute to the problems of big business. We're setting in motion the change. That's why I arbitrarily picked 1896 as the end date. But if you look, we've gone from, the robber barons, John D. Rockefeller, as celebrities, to now the war of wealth, that whole idea of war on poverty, class struggle, stuff like that. We're starting to get those ideas now. And it's those ideas that will trigger the rise of a new third party, the Populist Party. And the Populists they want to do what the later Progressives will do. That is, correct economic ills. It sucks if you're out of work. It sucks the robber barons make so much money. They want to fix it. And these guys, they're pretty radical. They want direct election of senators. They take that Grange movement, that patrons of husbandry idea of direct election of senators. They want the U.S. off the gold standard. They want to help poor people. They also want complete racial equality. Bear in mind, 1896, the election they influenced, that's the same year we get separate but equal. These people say, no, we want racial equality. As such, and this should be no surprise, you could not vote for these people in the South. Now, they're unsuccessful in 1892. Democrats try to block their votes in the South again. They don't. It's that whole racial equality. That's the sticking point. What is important about these is they influence the election of 1896, which I would argue, so much so I believe it's an ID term, that frankly it is one of, if not the most critical election in American history, it is probably one of the most important. And it's important for what it leads to. The significance I actually don't have here. The significance is for you guys listening to those that actually read the textbook. The significance is what we're going to see. Well, actually, hold off on the significance. We're going to see William McKinley run for the Republicans. We're going to see Jennings Bryan for the Democrats. And this will be one of the first truly modern elections. The populists want Bryan, so they nominate him as well. And so what we're going to see, your voting team will literally say McKinley, Bryan, Bryan. They split the vote. We have, for the first time, the modern campaign, in the sense that McKinley still ran how you were used to originally, unlike what we see today. And God, I wish it was like this. My Facebook would be so much more pleasure to read. Is what you would do. You did not want to be president. Instead, the American people campaigned on your behalf. You might give a couple speeches. People campaigned. The people then decided they wanted you to be president. The people then voted for you, and then you begrudgingly would say, well, I can't turn my back on the will of the people. If it's the will of the people that I be president, then so be it. That's how McKinley does. They literally bust people in. He stands up, gives a speech, sits down. They bust in the next group, and on and on and on. But Bryan goes out, and he actively campaigns. He does the first whistle-stop tour, going all over the nation. And his big famous thing is the Cross of Gold speech, where he would say, I will not let this nation be crucified on a cross of gold. And the whole idea was to just fire people up to vote for him. We also see the big business as lobbyists. In a sense, the robber barons spend stupid amounts of money to help McKinley get elected. Why? Because McKinley is pro-big business. We're clearly starting to see the Democrats being anti-business, or at least wanting to regulate business, the Republicans being pro-business. Now, McKinley is going to win 271 to 176. And why this is so important are three reasons. One, person, time, technology. McKinley is not an activist president, but McKinley is presiding over when the United States becomes a world power. 1898, we embark on our first war of empire. 1899, he starts the first American colonial war. And so without him, the United States might not have become a world power just yet. We see the influence of, big business trying to have their own stuff, but McKinley, in his 1900 election, is forced to put Theodore Roosevelt on the ticket. And when McKinley falls victim to the zero-year curse, Roosevelt, one, can't be contained, two, he considers himself progressive, he is pro-business regulation. 1896 sets that up. And third, it's the first truly modern election in the sense that now people are going to campaign. You're going to have, guys like McKinley, who his detractors said was like the Platte River, a mile wide at the mouth, but only an inch deep. Give that cross of gold speech, be really, really, really animated. Now, what I want to do is end up, for those of you that you made it here, just a couple of jokes. One, I'm sure you look quite like this guy now, like, oh God, will this guy shut up? But hopefully none of you look like this, which is, and I love this picture because every time I see it, I just think of McKinley in an old man voice going, oh my God, I have to poop. I'm just saying that's what it looks like to me. All right, on that happy note, that's going to end our Gilded Age lecture. We'll pick up next time, springboarding from 1896, talking about the beginning of American imperialism, the transition from that agricultural power to a world power. But as there will probably be a Gilded Age question on your exam, what I encourage you to do is take away from the Gilded Age that it's horrible if you're, no name nobody. It's horrible if you're a working person. It's gilded for a reason. But it's the transition of the United States into modernity. It's the modernization and industrialization of the United States that without that, we could not have embarked as a world power. And for better or for worse, we're getting to the birth of Team America World Police. For those of you watching, and I will say this again later, mean ye mean. If you don't know the movie, watch Team America. So understand, Gilded Age, it's very, very, very important. It sucks. There's a lot of stuff. It set the stage for reform, and a lot of that we're going to do later. But understand, it's that necessary, if not violent, transition to modernity. All right, sorry I ran a little long. Take off. Have a good one. There'll probably be 2 more lectures this week. Remember, your exam is next week. As always, if you have questions, anything I can do, just, don't hesitate to ask. Just let me know. All right, take it easy. I kind of blanked on how to end this, so awkwardly, bye-bye!